All right, so welcome to our second session of Insights with Protocol. I'm very excited to be joined by Dr. Ankit Chawla. I hope I pronounced that right because we did
Perfect. Yeah.
talk about it beforehand. Dr. Ankit and I met maybe 2, 3 weeks ago, not that long ago, but
hmm
very, very much aligned with what we've been talking about within the community around things like tech, biomarkers, and effectively a more holistic approach, a functional approach to our well-being. So we all know it's very easy to get caught up in a lot of the technicalities and a lot of what can become very overwhelming around the different tests, the different hormones, the different everything else that could be impacting our well-being. And Dr. Ankit has previously been in the NHS and has moved into his own business now, very much focused on functional medicine and providing more insights to his clients on a much more bespoke basis. So with that, I will have missed a great deal in that introduction. Perhaps, Dr. Ankit, if you don't mind, or if you might mind me calling you Ankit, if you could just
Yeah,
give us
sure.
a very brief background as to sort of your journey so far, because I know I've had the luxury of hearing it, but obviously everyone else here has not.
Yeah, certainly. No, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. Always a joy to try and spread the message of good health and how to live well and how to get the most out of your life. And that's kind of my passion. Um, Tell you a little bit about my story and my background, I guess. I'm a physician. I'm based in the UK, trained here in the UK. I live around London. My clinic, AGAMI Health, is in London. But my journey is sort of slightly intertwined with lots of other things. Um, Trained in London as to become a doctor, and then kind of all the way through felt a little bit kind of disenchanted with medicine in a way because conventional medicine is taught in a certain way. It's very disease focused and didn't really allow me to know how to create health from a medical perspective. Now, on a personal perspective, the way I was living my life was very much rooted in health and creating health. So, um, very much focused in fitness and nutrition myself since a very young age. So, at some point along my career, so I trained to become a GP in the UK, and then at some point after that, I sort of stumbled across this whole sort of growing world of functional health, functional medicine, and longevity. And finally, I sort of came across an aspect of my professional work where I felt I could finally bring that together with my personal passion. And that is that, like I said, creating health and helping people get the most out of their health potential. So trained with the Institute of for Functional Medicine over the last several years, um, educating myself always, which is another big passion of mine, as Liz and I have spoken about before. Sort of perpetual learner is who I am. And then a few years ago, set up my own clinic, which is Agami Health, and that sort of lives at the intersection of functional medicine, precision medicine, and longevity. And the idea is that it's sort of a foundational health partnership, is that we try to create long-term health from the ground up. And we try to get you feeling better now. We try to proactively prevent chronic disease, and we try with some tools to slow down your pace of aging and then get you just getting the most out of life, right? And I think the biggest thing about what we do is that you get all flavors of kind of longevity clinics around the country and the world. We are very much rooted in not being too cowboy about that and not going into too many experimental things that are far from proven. We focus on the foundations first. Um, we are very much rooted in the holistic health aspect in that we can optimize your biomarkers till the cows come home. But actually, if there isn't a bigger purpose if there isn't that context into what the joy of life really means to you and the kind of emotional well-being side of things, then we're missing something. And that's where we live. That's my passion, obviously, given my experience and my breadth of experience across almost every facet of health. That's where I've landed, and that's what we do now.
Amazing. And I think that's a really valid point in that we're not actually machines, so you can optimize all you want, but if your quality of life and your enjoyment of life is deteriorating, then actually it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory
For
um,
sure.
around that one. And then, so yes, I should have mentioned that. So you have possibly the most letters after your name, if you were to use them, that I've ever come across. So tons and tons of qualifications. You're also very into tech and
Yes.
apps and everything
Yes.
else. So how do you see the intersection of the two between the functional and the precision medicine and then sort of tech and app development and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, like, so it is. I mean, I know lots of people with more letters than mine, so it's far from the most. But yes, I have more than are perhaps useful for me. Um, so I like by nature, I am more of a mathematician and a physicist than a doctor, let's say. I mean, I love being a doctor and I enjoy that side of what I do. But by nature, that's who I am. So like that kind of lends itself very much more so to what I enjoy the most, which is problem solving, solving complex problems with from first principles, right? And that's kind of the engineer in me. So at some point in my journey, I sort of stepped away from medicine, did a master's in bioengineering, and that was kind of my interface of technology and health. And that's what I really love because actually, as I said earlier, like medicine is not taught that way. Medicine is not taught to engineer health. Medicine is taught to treat disease, diagnose and treat disease. And that kind of it's not quite satisfying for me. So for me, like I what I enjoy is how technology allows us to A, generate much deeper insight into someone's health, B, gives them a better experience while we do that, and C, obviously the biggest part is treatments and interventions that technology can leverage, right, to help with human health. But like, yeah, as Liz, you know, like you were mentioning, we were chatting a while ago about, yeah, like as a hobby, I think during COVID, I taught myself to code and started building apps and stuff. And not many of my physician colleagues will ever do that. But again, it's just my passion for learning really that taught me there. But also like the idea that I'm a true believer that great things happen when you bring either bring people together from different walks of life and different expertise, or you do that yourself and you go out and you explore different areas of expertise and then you generate insights that otherwise other people would not have. So that's kind of my reason for doing that. And I think how it lends into what I do in medicine is that I think like an engineer. So like it's being able to well the joy of kind of understanding at a much deeper level what is the most complex system known to mankind, the human body, and then taking sort of some bit of enjoyment and passion in manipulating that and optimizing that from the ground up from a systems level rather than sort of top level just screening you for these sort of broad entities of diseases and saying okay you have this disease or you don't. We sort of get a lot deeper and see the imbalances that occur in the systems before then.
And that's a super interesting point. So you touched on, I hope I'm not paraphrasing too much, but your frustration from the traditional NHS approach to medicine around being disease management or dealing with
Mm-hmm.
diseases once they're done. And you obviously like to try and problem solve and identify things like red flags and get in there and do that problem solving before that occurs. What would you say are the most common red flags that you see now with your clinic and everything else, or even just your research that people should be watching out for?
I mean, there's lots of these, and I think they're different for everybody, but it's like people often ignore the subtle changes, thinking that it's just part of getting older or, something or the other. The biggest one I find is that kind of that subtle fatigue when people feel that, especially the high performing kind of professionals, like, most people here, or everybody here, is that those people are very good at performing when it comes to work. They put everything, all of their biology and the physiological reserve into getting the job done when it comes to work. But then what they find is that there are those ups and downs in energy levels. So energy is a big thing. So when people ignore that sort of post lunch kind of slump, that lull that you get, or perhaps I mean energy applies to every system in the body. So like on a broader scale, that looks like fatigue and tiredness. But actually, if you go in a little deeper, it's fatigue in the brain, where people feel that cognitive fatigue, that decision making isn't as sharp. They're not quite as sharp as they were before. And people again put that down to I've not slept well enough. I'm getting a little older, all sorts of things. But actually, these are some of the early signs of what we like. One of the sort of passions that I like to focus on in my clinic is kind of mitochondrial health, and that's the energy production in your cells in your body, and that's such a big part of performing well, but also chronic diseases. Like most chronic diseases have roots in energy deficiency, and it's funny because again, in a world where there is no deficiency of energy externally, there's a lot of food to be taken in and energy, but our bodies become inefficient at dealing with that. And these are some of the early signs. I mean, the other ones are like that slow creep of sort of weight gain, that sort of stubborn weight that won't come off, signs of insulin resistance, basically that being. Um, but another, I think like another, not necessarily a red flag that people miss, but actually not because of their own doing, but actually people go, even people who are trying to be proactive and go for their health assessments, like once a year and see their doctor, they get these health assessments done, but traditional medicine will not give you the advice and the proactive sort of insights and interventions that you might benefit from until it's really late. So actually, a really common scenario is I see people who've had health assessments with their regular doctors every year, and they come and see me, and I'm sort of pretty taken back by how bad some of their markers are. And they've always been told, well, you're in your 30s, you're 40, it's okay, don't worry about it. Like it's because you don't meet that threshold for disease, you're okay, but that's far from true, and that's kind of one of the most biggest frustrations for me, and one of those red flags that often get missed again because of healthcare rather than somebody missing it themselves.
Yeah, and I have to say, and we've talked about this before, I see that a lot with female clients in particular.
Yeah,
And I see Grace has raised her hand, so she might be about to ask a similar question. So
yeah,
I'll
for
ask
sure.
and then hand the mic over to Grace. But
Yeah,
I very often see on things like thyroid tests, hormone tests, everything, particularly once women hit sort of 35 onwards, they're told it's normal, told not to worry about it. But actually, there are interventions that they can be making in terms of lifestyle, things that they're doing. It doesn't
yeah,
have to be medication that
yeah,
actually would significantly boost their energy levels and reduce their insulin resistance. And so I know we've talked about that before. It's obviously something I'm very passionate about. But it
yeah,
is a frustration with even the private medical care system in multiple countries. This is not specifically an attack on the NHS or any doctors here. But yeah, I find it's a bit of an issue. Grace, sorry, have I covered your question or is there something else you'd like to ask?
Yeah, it's quite of similar because currently the common the health assessments right on the measurement biomarkers, for example, the blood image, MRI screening, so on and so forth. But however, the other critical factor, for example, the stress that
yeah.
are non-measurable. So I just try to understand based on your experience or currently what exactly the assessment
I don't know if
and
that's
toolings you are using in order to provide holistically the health overviews, and then that will be help the patients and then to drive the best recommendations and then the health lifestyle change.
Yeah, for sure. No, thanks for the question, Grace. I mean, yeah, happy to explain that a little bit more. So our assessment is very different to what most people will get in the clinic. So you will get all of we do all of the standard, quote unquote standard metrics that everybody gets, but we go above and beyond. So it includes a functional sort of health assessment, and that is on a cellular level, looking much deeper. So in terms of Okay, let's talk about kind of one of the common things that people get checked when they go for the health assessment, cholesterol and lipid metrics, right? So what most people will normally get is a total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol. If they are lucky, they will get something called an ApoB, which if people don't know what that is, happy to explain. Again, just let me know. But that's a much more kind of in-depth, relevant marker of somebody's risk of atherosclerosis, which is the narrowing up of your arteries over time. So we do all of that, plus we look at obviously the ApoB level. We look at something called LPA, which is a genetic sort of marker of a certain type of cholesterol particle that is much worse than some of the others. We look at inflammation, again, at a much deeper cellular level, but also in your vasculature, we'll be able to look at inflammation there. And then we look at your metabolic health as a whole, because that is very closely interlinked to cardiovascular disease. So that's a little sort of a small part of kind of just giving you an example of how our approach is different to standard health assessments. But on the bigger picture, you're answering questions around kind of how we assess stress and how we assess other aspects of your health. So we'll do something called a functional nutritional evaluation where it actually assesses your not just your kind of level of nutrients in your blood, but actually the downstream pathways that require those nutrients and be able to assess in a personalized way for you, are you getting enough of those nutrients for you? Because five people in this call, all of us could have the same level in our blood, but because of our underlying genetics and biology, we need different amounts, right? So that's another part. Stress is an interesting one, is that we do testing for kind of biological consequences of chronic stress. That includes kind of hormonal testing across the span of kind of cortisol, melatonin, DHEA, some of these kind of adrenal hormones, but then also kind of sex hormones and all the downstream effects on the whole hormonal network. Because what we know is that stress, chronic stress, essentially pulls away substrates from the other kind of non-essential hormonal pathways like sex hormones. So we know it's a phenomenon called kind of cortisol steal. So cortisol, most people know, is kind of your stress hormone. And when you're chronically stressed, your body's constantly producing a lot of cortisol. Cortisol is produced from the same precursor molecule that produces all your sex hormones. So if your body's in this constant fight or flight mode, sort of genetically, evolutionarily, we sort of have this system that says, well, now's not a good time for us to be reproducing, so let's just turn down those sex hormones. Let's turn them off, and that obviously has downstream effects. And so we can check all of these things, but when it comes to stress, often the answer is in the story I get from a client. So when I'm speaking to people, I can almost guess what their cortisol profile is going to be, because actually, and this is the art of good medicine, right? A good doctor gets most of his answers from talking to his clients and his patients, because actually, if we ask the right questions and we check for the right positives and negatives, testing is really just to confirm what we already suspect. And it's sometimes helpful to guide, let's say, dosages of certain interventions that we might give you to support that kind of stress management and reduction in those cortisol hormones. But it's not so on the stress front, we do that testing when we're guiding treatment, but actually, it's about creating that connection with the patient and giving them time to talk. Really, that's a part of the assessment for us, right? Does that help? Does that answer some of your questions? And that, please do feel free to kind of add on to that if you like.
Yes, and I locked down a few of the acronym. I think I need to do some GPT this test. Thank you.
Yeah.
We can certainly link and then provide more information on everything we're
Yeah.
talking about today, Grace. That's no issue at all. Obviously, as a coach, I'm all pro for the questions, but there is a risk then of confirmation bias as well, presumably, if we're looking for something we already suspect. Have you ever been kind of caught out or really surprised? Because I'm conscious we've got a bit of a mix in this audience here. We've got some people who will have been under chronic stress for like a good decade. And very high cortisol levels, I would imagine, but again, I would only be confirming what I believe. And then some people who are very practiced at managing their stress levels and how they release them and everything else. So I think it's really interesting to see the difference, even when people are in the same environment.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to kind of the phases of the chronic stress response, which some of you may or may not know, but like over a long period of time, the body goes through phases. And the first one is kind of hyperarousal. So like that's that chronically high cortisol where you can't fall asleep. You're chronically sort of, a little bit anxious, on edge, always go, 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 go. And the body manages very well. The body's very good at compensating for external stresses. It does that for a long, long time until then it starts to fail. And that's kind of the next phase where actually your total cortisol production might not be as high, but the normal rhythm is thrown off. So normally cortisol peaks when you wake up in the morning, as it should. That the arousal sort of response, and then it sort of slowly over the course of the day declines, and it's at its lowest when you go to bed. Ideally, that diurnal variation can switch sometimes when people are sort of running out of steam to actually carry on keeping up with this demand for cortisol. The next thing that happens is that switches, and then the end stage, the stage 3, is just complete failure, where actually you are just exhausted. And people may experience that as burnout, where they can't go anymore, and they don't feel refreshed in the morning. They'll just sleep much longer than normal, but still waking, not feeling refreshed, because they don't have the capacity to create that cortisol response in the morning. So this is one of the examples where, again, you might see people at different phases, and where they're all chronically stressed, but and how long people take to go between each phase will depend on so much else in terms of their physiological reserve. So that's why you catch people, appearing differently, but all chronically stressed.
Yeah, and so I think I've probably seen myself in all 3 of those stages at times
I'm
as
sure
well.
we all have.
Yeah. So then we obviously work with executives, high stress environments, lots of travel, lots of disruption of those circadian rhythms and everything else, and those natural hormone patterns. What would you What would your advice be to people who know that they have that environment? And you and I were chatting before this call, obviously, different phases of life, different pressures, different demands on our time that quite often really aren't within our control, whether that's work, whether that's family, whether that's a combo. What would your advice be to someone who is sort of struggling with that at the moment? And typically we have A types as part of this community. So they're obviously beating themselves up and just saying, well, I'm just not optimizing enough and it's me, I need to do better.
No, you're quite right. And we spoke about this just before we went live, wasn't it? Is that, I mean, let me kind of give you a sort of overall framework. A few principles I normally give to kind of most of my clients, but particularly in this situation. Prioritize the foundations, right? So the foundational pillars being, movement, exercise in the right type and amount, food, sleep, and stress. Okay, that's very easily said, but those are kind of just to lay out the foundations. But then what I would say is, and as we spoke earlier, Liz, is accepting imperfections in that if we continually strive for perfection, that's okay, provided that we accept that we're not going to get there, because it's impossible to perfect all of that. Knowing what perfect is helpful. Striving for it is good, but beating yourself up when you're not quite there is just detrimental to the whole process. Like don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right? So what I then say is, okay, lean into where you have room to work on those, right? So some people, like you say, busy executives, sleep is often the thing that's first sacrificed, because wrongly so, people often think that's the thing that there's some leeway to kind of let go, that couldn't be far from the truth. It couldn't be further from the truth. But so that some people might feel like they're very good at the habits they've created around the active things, about looking after their health, like exercise, nutrition, meal planning is a big one. So like if it's always very easy to lean into easy, convenient meals when life is busy, but like planning. And one little tip I always give is around food is, this is a little hack for me. I mean, it's not really a hack, but it's my version of a hack. It's just cooking bulk, cooking bigger amounts. So like for me, my dinner from the evening is always my next day's lunch, and that way I know I have a good wholesome meal, lunch and dinner every day, right? That doesn't need to be prepared every single time. But then like in terms of that part was kind of leaning into your areas of your life where you're good at it, you're good at that, and you've got some room to go into. In the areas where you feel that it's going to be harder for you to create those new habits, or just because of the demands of your job or your life, that's going to be difficult. Then maybe leverage some tools, and that might be speaking to someone like me, or just educating yourself around supplements and support that is out there to help you with that. So when that comes to sleep, that might be something as simple as sort of educating yourself around sleep hygiene and what to do and what not to do. And a big thing I'm always telling clients around that is aligning yourself with that kind of circadian rhythm of light. So light exposure is a big driver of our circadian rhythm, and it's thrown out so much because of people's working patterns, their exposures to artificial light, the way they eat, the way they live, but also just up here, just not switching off. And most of the type A personalities, as we say, are can have it within them to be very disciplined. So I would normally say try and apply that same discipline to switching off. It's about like leaning into who you are, like leverage that strength in your personality that you can be very disciplined, but reframe that as to the value of doing that for something that feels like it's unproductive or a waste of time, but actually in the long run it pays you back much more. So like a lot of this is about reframing kind of the value of some of these things as not wasted time and not unproductive time, but actually in the long run supporting your own health and longevity when it comes to health and work success, right? And then like supplements and things when it comes to sleep. Sometimes we lean into that in terms of stress management. We recommend things sometimes like L-theanine and sometimes ashwagandha, ginseng. So these are examples of just sort of top level things that we suggest. Exercise, I always say, don't waste your time running on a treadmill or doing long steady state exercise for too long if you're short on time, right? Like there are ways to get a really efficient workout in 15-20 minutes that gives you real bang for your buck. So I think, like, again, lean into what you're good at, leverage some tools in the gaps that there are and maybe where you'll struggle, and then get some support, get some help. And I think like the biggest thing is like reframing around, don't worry if things are not perfect. You know, that's okay. That's actually the human experience. Like if you try and optimize too much, you kind of take away from the reason for optimizing, because most of us have a reason for wanting to live longer and live healthier. And if in trying to do so, we forget to enjoy the moments and the days with our, for me, that's fat. I have two kids. I have a 4-year-old and an 18-month-old. Like for me, that's, if I forget to enjoy that in the process of optimizing everything, then what's the point? That's the way I look at it, and that's what I try and kind of get across to a lot of my clients who come and see me are kind of very motivated, very kind of let's optimize everything. Sometimes you have to just take a step back and understand that longevity and health is about much more than just the markers on the screen.
Yeah, you've always got to come back to the why, right? Why do you want to live for a very long time?
Yeah.
Amazing. All right. I have one thing that I wanted to go back to, but also you just touched on exercise. So I do want to touch on muscle, because I know that you're very passionate about exercise and muscle, but also the other thing, and I don't know if it's connected or not, genuinely, so this might be a stupid question. You're very passionate about mitochondrial health. I was wondering how we can improve our mitochondrial health.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So for those of you who don't know, and maybe you all know, but mitochondria are in almost every cell in your body. That's where the magic happens, I like to say. That's where energy is produced, but above and beyond that, they do lots more. But energy being such a key life force, right? Like everything that happens in our body requires energy. Otherwise, we are just when we're not alive, right? So for me, mitochondrial health, there's lots of ways that you can support that, right? And again, it kind of a lot of it comes down to again the foundational pillars. Exercise and nutrition are the biggest ones, right? So when I say mitochondrial health, what I mean is the capacity of your body to efficiently produce energy and be able to use it efficiently. So how do we get energy from? For humans, that's from food, right? So what we eat really matters. So in the modern world, sadly, most people's diets are often too heavily sort of leaning into carbohydrates. And that's fine. Carbohydrates are a source of fuel, and they're not the enemy. They are something to be respected and something to be used in the right way, in the right dose for the right person at the right time, right? But what tends to happen is for most people, if most people look at their plate of food, and if you work out, proportionally the macros in that plate, there's often too big a proportion of carbohydrates. What that means is chronically over a long period of time, most people, certainly in the Western world and developed world, their mitochondria and their energy production system is too used to having a constant influx of carbohydrates. Now, carbohydrates turn out are not the most efficient source of fuel. The most efficient source of fuels are fats, right? So ideally, what you want is your mitochondria to be able to switch between the two fuel sources easily. And that becomes a problem when you're constantly fueling it with that easy source of fuel of carbohydrates. And that's where we see where people often notice that kind of post-lunch kind of lull, that slump, is that their body's not able to switch easily. So you've had the carbohydrates for lunch, your body should seamlessly switch into using fats when you start to feel that lack of energy, but it doesn't. And until your body kind of kicks in and does that, you feel that period of a slump. So food is really important, right? So eating the right macronutrients is really important. Eating the right balance of micronutrients is really important. So that includes things. I mean, when I'm going back to macros, is kind of what kind of fat should we be eating, right? And obviously we all know that eating not, minimizing how much saturated fat you eat is really important. Maximizing how much unsaturated healthy fats you eat is really, really important. And getting your body used to using fats as a source of fuel is really good for your mitochondria. So sometimes, people talk about sort of ketones and ketones being what your body produces when it runs out of carbohydrates as fuel. And ketones are really, really powerful because actually they are such a good source of fuel. And sometimes people even actually take exogenous ketones as a supplement to support the mitochondria to learn to use those. And actually people find that supports a lot, a much better energy production capacity. So that's food, broadly speaking. I mean, like the macronutrient balance is a big part of how you use food to sort of support your mitochondrial health. Obviously, there's a really important part of that is micronutrients, so making sure you're getting all the right vitamins, minerals, magnesium, zinc, all these other things are really important. And then exercise is probably the biggest other factor here. Mitochondria live in our cells. The biggest sort of location of mitochondria really is in muscle. So the more muscle you have, the more mitochondria you will have. The more efficient and strong muscle you have, the more mitochondria you will have. The bigger cardiovascular capacity you will have, the more mitochondria you will have, right? So what that means is that training towards those goals. So for me, like we were talking about muscle, Liz, and that's really a big tenet of my sort of framework towards health and long-term health and longevity is muscle is the ultimate currency of longevity. Because other than getting you strong and performing well and looking good and all the things that people want, it's a metabolic powerhouse. So muscle is the biggest, I like to say, sink for glucose in your body. So whenever you eat glucose, unless you're going to be using it up pretty soon, your body will have to store it somewhere. And it will store it away as something called glycogen. Now, 80% of where your body stores that is in your muscle, 20% is in the liver. So um, if you if you think of that as sort of a sink, now once you fill up that sink of glucose storage, your body then, if you're still taking excess glucose in, you're going to have to put it somewhere else, and the body's going to put that somewhere as fat, right? So that's why you develop fat stores. That's why you put on weight. That's why fat ends up coming on in various different parts of your body. Fat is only really, really bad when it ends up around your organs, right? So the idea of building more muscle is actually expand that sink, expand the available space for you to store glucose, which means that you have more leeway to actually eat the carbohydrates that can then support you to do the right amount of exercise, to then build more muscle, to then it's kind of a positive feed forward loop where actually you build a bigger and bigger engine, allowing you to actually train better, perform better, allowing you to actually eat more and get more
Mm.
nutrients in and just perform better all around. So like those, I mean, those are the big two things I think about mitochondrial health in terms of the foundations. Obviously, we then need to supplement some things that can help support that where there are gaps as well. But as a foundations, those are the things I really feel like to focus on.
So focusing on the macros and a little bit the micros as well. So it's kind of like
Yeah,
2.1.
yeah,
And then making sure that you're doing exercise that builds muscle, which I find very interesting. So obviously when I'm working with clients, again, particularly females, there's a reluctance to put muscle on, and people who've been running or doing, cardio for a very long time get frustrated when that is no longer working.
yeah.
So one of the main reasons for that then is mitochondrial health as well, in addition to the strength, the load bearing, the ability to burn more
For
calories,
sure.
everything else, the
For,
increased
for
metabolic rates.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, yeah, you build a bigger engine, you'll just be burning more calories at rest, right?
Mm.
It makes everything easier. But also then, I mean, muscles when you exercise and really push them release a whole host of other signaling molecules that, impact lots of other pathways like inflammation and chronic disease risk and all sorts of other things. I mean, I would say like this is a real bugbear of mine, this kind of reluctance, particularly sadly, I find in sort of, more females than males around muscle building, this worry about kind of getting too big. Believe me, as someone who's tried to build muscle a lot throughout my whole life, it doesn't happen by accident. You have to try really, really hard to get too big. And I always say, I mean, aside from muscle, like when I say building muscle, I say training to build muscle. But actually, you can do that in ways where actually it supports a really other important aspect of your longevity and fitness is your VO2 max. So
Mm.
like when I say building muscle, I say focus on kind of what we call the type 1 fibers. So that's kind of the kind of explosive strength and kind of really pushing yourself with sort of the rep range when you're doing lifting weights for kind of 6 to 10, right? But also then, if during the same workout towards the end, you can then build in more kind of hit training with resistance where actually it's still working your muscles pretty hard, but you get that cardiovascular intense workout where, 10, 15 minutes, you can really work that energy system where you're going to push your VO2 max up higher and higher. Again, such an important metric for longevity and health, right? So essentially weight like lifting weights for me, you can do it all. Like if you're limited on time in terms of exercise, and I was to pick one tool to use, go lift some weights.
Amazing. Well, that kind of nails my last question for you, and I'll give everyone a bit of notice because we do like to leave a little bit of time for anyone else
Yeah,
to ask questions. But my last question was going to be, if someone wanted to live to like 100 years now, what would your
yeah,
like number one tip for them be? I think you've given us multiple tips on that front.
yeah,
So take care of your
yeah.
sleep, take care of the fundamentals, lift weights, and make sure
Yeah,
you
like
know
yeah.
what you're living to 100 for.
Yeah, exactly. So like that kind of covers a lot of it. Like for me, yeah, that's the first thing if people aren't already doing it, like obviously learn to do it properly, right? Lift like, you don't want to just jump into the gym and start doing all sorts of exercises that you're not ready to do because I think like injury prevention is a big, big part of living to a long age, right? So you want to make sure you're learning the movement patterns and the kind of the neuromuscular activation patterns to do the movements correct, but then build off that and lift weights. So that's the first thing. Build muscle, build a bigger engine. The second thing is around food is like simple principles apply. A simple tip I give is if your great grandmother would not recognize this food, try to avoid eating it. Right. So eat minimal things that come out of packaging. Eat mostly things that came from the earth. And there's lots more nuance to that, which is obviously what we go into. But as a general principle, that's what I say around food. Stress is perhaps it's not a sort of a cliche, but stress is perhaps the biggest driver of chronic disease and dysfunction there is. So what I try to build with clients over a long period of time is that kind of, again, that reframing of stress and that reframing of what's important to you in life and what really matters. You know, like a sort of belief that I live by my whole life is most people can probably count on one hand what is really, really, really important to them, right? What really matters in their life. And until something threatens those 3, 4, 5 things, don't sweat the small stuff. I know that's easier said than done, but I think like it's about training your mind. You know, I don't know if you've heard of the term, and I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this recording, but you know, the subtle art of not giving a fuck, you know, giving a fuck. So like it's actually really important because actually chronic stress is about people caring about things that really aren't truly that meaningful to them, but they create barriers to their mind in that moment. And understanding that, yes, I have to do this now, but actually this doesn't define me, doesn't define my being, doesn't define my purpose and my health, you know, all the things that matter to me. So that's a really, really big part. And I think maintaining a purpose in life is really important. That's very easy at this stage of life, but as you go forward, life will throw curveballs at you. You know, corporate life is not always fun and games and high flying, you know, things go up and down, but like maintaining a purpose is so important. And then social connection, like maintaining some sort of like reason socially, whether that's family, friends, but like social connection is a big determinant of your health. And then, yeah, if you need some help, get yourself a good doctor that can guide you through that. That's what I would say.
Of course, and we will link obviously to AGAMI and yourself and everything else.
Yeah.
You're already up in the Circle community as one of our experts, as we discussed. So,
Yeah.
so people will know how to find you and everything else. And hopefully you'll come back again in the future as well when we're talking about
No, I would love to.
topics.
Yeah.
Before we close, I'm just going to open it up to everyone else on the call. Any questions for Ankit?
I do have a quick question. So if you've got the fundamentals right, at what age would you kind of recommend that people start comprehensive biomarker testing?
Sure, that's a really good question. I would say some biomarkers you can't, you know, you can never do it early enough because some biomarkers are actually genetically determined, and actually, despite living fairly optimally from a foundational perspective, they can pose risks to your long-term health. One example of that is cardiovascular disease. So people can have genetic predispositions to developing cardiovascular disease, and that's through no wrongdoing of their own. They might be eating right, exercising right, doing all of that. So like certainly from a cardiometabolic perspective, I always say like even in your 30s, I would say get that checked, even if it's a one-off. And if it's perfect, okay, maybe don't have to do it every year if you feel that you're still in the same, you know, physical condition and are feeling okay. But like as a one-off, I would say you can start in your 30s, right? But then like there are also, even in your 30s, despite eating well, just because of the food environment, you know, that the world lives in now, there can be a lot of nutritional gaps that can then also contribute to the risk of chronic disease. So like I do, you know, our complete health assessment, or what we call our primordial health assessment we do on all our clients. I have people coming in their 30s who are really fit, active, very, you know, very much optimized, seemingly not a single person has had a perfect nutritional evaluation. And that speaks to the reality that you'll be doing pretty good, but like, is it optimal? Is it actually minimizing your risk of chronic disease? Because again, what is important here is about being proactive and preventing. True prevention starts at the beginning. So you can never start early enough. But I appreciate, like, as someone who's feeling maybe well, it's maybe useful to do all of this as a one-off and then see where your gaps are. And then you can maybe focus the further testing annually on that, you know, rather than doing everything every year at that point. But you know, for me, you can never start too early. That's my point.
Makes sense. Thank you.
To get biomarkers done, how do we do that? Is it just a case of going to your GP and saying this is what I'm doing? Or I mean, I saw my GP a little while ago and said I'd like to have a blood works test, and then they say, well, what do you want to test for?
Yeah.
And well, I don't really know everything. And then
Yeah.
it's going to cost me like thousands of dollars, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure I really want to spend all of that much money on it. Maybe that's Hong Kong, I don't know, but and also I take supplements. I take B12 in the morning because I'm vegan. I'm interested in my health overall, but you know, if I test for B12 and it's going to come back and say I've got like lots of B12 because I'm supplementing with B12, so is that worth testing? I don't know.
Yeah, no, good question. So this is a real problem, and I think the real issue is that so you're based in Hong Kong, Tim, or
Yeah.
is that in Hong Kong? So like the conventional healthcare system is not set up to answer that question. Like you as a patient will go in and say, I just want a screen for everything, and it's difficult for them because actually there is no tick box on their ordering screen that says test for everything, right? They have to specify what, and then it becomes where do they draw their line, and they draw their line very low. They draw their line with kind of the very basic kind of markers that doesn't tell you very much. It doesn't tell you about your risk of chronic disease. It doesn't tell you about the kind of the imbalances that precede diseases by 10, 15 years sometimes. So I think how you go about it is I think like what we do is we break your health and your health trajectory down into domains, right? And we understand the domains of health that are important to assess when it comes to biomarkers. So for us, that one of those things is nutritional adequacy, right? The other one, other examples might be mitochondrial health, inflammation, cardiovascular disease, metabolic health, gut health, then more basic biomarkers that you get at your GP, like your kidney function, liver function. But again, there are more advanced markers that we can do that assess that much better. So I think like breaking it down into those domains helps. But again, when you go to a conventional doctor, they won't have access to most of these tests because they're not really freely available. They're not, and most of your doctors won't even know what these tests are, and they won't even know what they mean because again, training in the conventional medicine world doesn't give you this knowledge. Like these are things that we do in my practice because people like me have learned this ourselves just off from learning the science and delving into the science. So I think like how you go about doing it is I think like either visiting a doctor who does that, like visiting a doctor who does health optimization and longevity and functional health, or then like I guess diving deep into kind of some the knowledge around that and understanding the markers in terms of what they mean. I think the biggest one I would say if you're kind of just starting out is like know your kind of the advanced cardiovascular disease risk markers. So like all your lipoprotein metrics and inflammation markers, and then metabolic health markers. So not just your kind of diabetes check that you may have had done, which is a HbA1c, which is a very late marker of metabolic dysfunction. Knowing things like your fasting insulin, fasting glucose, some of these things are really important. So I think like it's just, knowledge can be assimilated from lots of places, right? So like diving into the space is a bit of a never-ending sort of hole in a way, but like learning more and just picking up these things, you may then kind of go and learn a little bit more about cardiovascular disease and metabolic health and learning what markers you need to know. But if you feel like that's a too big a minefield to go in, given you're probably a very busy professional, find yourself the right doctor. You won't get that kind of care from a GP. You won't get it from insurance paying kind of services usually because interestingly, our service is sometimes covered under insurance sometimes because I'm a GP, so we can sort of swing it as that sometimes and get somebody covered. But yeah, standard care just will not give that to you.
And that is also, and we didn't set this up, but that is also where we come in from these are the key things at different stages. And if you're uploading your data into the protocol app, we'd be like, well, do you want to go and get this checked or do you want to go and get that checked? And then providing access to people. I would say having lived in 3 different continents and 3 different health services, Australia actually very proactive in the medical system around a lot of this stuff and under their health insurance. So Tim, I don't know if you can swing that next time you're down in Sydney, but I was having a lot of biomarkers done when I was in Australia, and that's 10 years ago versus Hong Kong, where actually people are really only looking for very specific diseases and, to your point, quite late stage, Ankit, as well. So it's very hard in Hong Kong to get these tests sort of done and with a level of confidence that people are proactively looking for stuff that's 10, 15 years down the line. But we can very easily, Tim, link to, we'll provide a glossary as well of some of the stuff we've talked about today. but also different areas, different ways in which this is done. And then obviously AGAMI Health does provide all of these, but we didn't set this up as a plug for either AGAMI or protocol. So it's really just an information kind of gathering session.
Yeah, sure. No, I would just add, yeah, like, I mean, finding good sources of information is very challenging, and who to trust, because there you'll find an influencer or a content creator with every view on the planet. Like, somebody will say, eat this way, somebody will say, eat that way, somebody say, do this, do that. I think like finding yourself a reputable, trustworthy resource is very difficult. That may be someone like us, and maybe somebody else. But I think don't rely on one person. So don't take what I say at face value and take that as gospel. I think assimilate from lots of resources and learn, and then only that way you can kind of feel a little bit more confident that the knowledge you're getting is trustworthy. Because if it all starts to align in the same direction, then that kind of probably, you know, gives it some credibility. But like, so like we have a blog on our website, which you're welcome, that's, you know, free. Just subscribe and you'll get content on there. And obviously, if you follow any of us, myself or Liz on our socials, then obviously we post content on there, and just kind of little tidbits of knowledge that might trigger more learning, you know, going forward as well. So I think just it's a journey. Longevity and health is a journey, and it's just about educating ourselves more.
Amazing. What a great point to close on. I'm very aware of time. So if there are no other urgent questions, thank you so much, Ankit. This has been really, really informative and very balanced, I think, as a conversation as well. And I knew it would be when we first met, but I really appreciate it. Very accessible for those of us who don't have all of your degrees and qualifications.
No, likewise, a pleasure. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been really nice speaking.
All right. Great to see you all, everyone. If you've got any follow-up questions, just give me a shout.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
I'm still recording. Thank you so much. I hope that was
No
okay
worries.
for
No.
you. Let me just try and
Yeah,
stop
yeah.
recording.
It was